The shift to remote and hybrid work over the past 2 years has accelerated application development on cloud infrastructure. However, securing these new assets has lagged behind. Qualys CloudView, the next generation of cloud security posture management, delivers an end-to-end multi-cloud security and compliance solution encompassing the entire application lifecycle from build to runtime. CloudView enables enterprises to assess their cloud security and compliance posture, identify risks and gaps, auto-remediate issues, proactively enforce best practices, and prove compliance in audits rapidly and efficiently. Identify your most vulnerable cloud assets by visiting securityweekly.com/Qualys. Can your incident response technology collect from off-network endpoints? Xterra FTK Enterprise can. Endpoints are no longer located in a physical office, and organizations need a comprehensive investigation tool that enables holistic data collection and review. With FTK Enterprise, you can also scan for IOCs and MISP indicators. You can scan with Yara rules, and you can use integrations to trigger automatic endpoint collections. Visit securityweekly.com/Xterra for access to their white paper, Incident Response for a Remote World. Welcome back to Enterprise Security Weekly. Don't miss any of your favorite Security Weekly content. Visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to any of our podcast feeds and have all new episodes downloaded right to your phone. You can also join our mailing list, Discord server, and follow us on social media and our streaming platforms, YouTube and Twitch. You can like, you can subscribe, you can follow, whatever you can do on those platforms. Send us an email, a tweet, an aged bottle of scotch. I mean, I'm not going to dictate how you interact with us. Just, we just crave feedback.
Absolutely. Bottles of scotch is definitely the preferred methodology. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, if we're going to rank them, if we're going to, prioritize that list. No, reviews would be great. I love getting feedback because I'm always trying out different things with the show and just, wondering what people think of them. So, yeah, feedback is good. All right, for our second segment today, instead of an interview, we're going to skip that format in favor of a deep dive on the Uber hack, which you might have heard about if you're anywhere near any kind of source of news for the last week. I think it's almost exactly a week, maybe 8. No, I think maybe it was last Thursday, either Wednesday or Thursday when that news first broke. And broke in the most spectacular fashion, which has reminded me a lot of the Sony Pictures hack, where the attackers that got into Sony Pictures had these controlled leaks. I think they leaked all the files like in 12 separate events to journalists and the general public. And I don't think this is going to be a slow burn exactly like that, but it's pretty similar. The attackers just trolling the company, posting stuff publicly, just having fun with it.
Yeah, and then the end result is the leak data that leaks over time, but then the continual news cycle that doesn't seem to leave it either. Here we are a week removed of it, and we're still discussing it in depth, and the continued release of steps done that were kind of the details of the hack and then how they could have mitigated it, instead of just getting that flood out all at once. It seems to have just have this long tail.
Yeah, I don't know if we'll see another Sony Pictures again, because their goal was to just air all the dirty laundry. Like, we got executives email, like there were stories on stories on stories, that were so far removed from the breach, like you forgot that you were even hearing that story because of the breach. There were stories about unequal pay between genders, because one of the things that came out in the Sony Pictures leak was a huge spreadsheet of a large accounting firm's employees and how much they got paid. So people start doing analysis on that spreadsheet. Like a single file from that breach, created a whole line of stories. So it was incredible.
Yeah, but it's still tough to know whether it's going to result in a similar output on this, though, because we seen all of the data that's going to be leaked? Have we seen everything? We don't know. It's still too soon to tell.
It's pretty early, and the the tweet thread that I put together, that's one of the first disclaimers I put in there is, any of this can change. A lot of this is coming from people who allegedly talked to the hacker, or things that the attacker publicly said. So we're, take all this with a grain of salt, but still, I think enough has been, come to public light that we can get into some lessons and kind of study it and learn a bit from it.
You're not going to get a complaint out of me, Adrian. Let's hear it. Let's dig in.
And the irony is the 2016 Uber hack still hasn't wrapped up because Joe Sullivan's case is ongoing and is in court right now. And that one's, what is that, 8 years old now? 6 years old. 6 years old. I can math. So we're not even done with that. That hasn't left the news cycle, and we've got a new one to talk about. Amazing.
Yeah, it just keeps refreshing.
So let's see. Good place to start. And if you look at the show notes, I have actually put I put together the different steps that were involved for the attacker to get in here, and I did publish those in the show notes, so you can go check those out. And kind of walks us through the whole process. And really, as I was saying to some friends of mine who are still pen testers, who I used to pen test with back in the day, I said, "Doesn't this look like your typical pen test?" And they're like, "Yeah, I mean, I do this every week. What's happened to Uber is something I do every week. It's totally normal, maybe except for the malware that they use to steal stuff." So this was actually fairly new to me. I knew that it existed, but I didn't know a whole lot about it. So there's this whole class of stealer malware for folks that don't know. Its only goal is to grab your OAuth keys, to grab credentials as you type it in, that kind of thing. Installs on a workstation, grabs credentials to stuff. They don't know if you're an employee at Uber or if you're an employee at Slack or EA or whatever. And EA is the great example here. How earlier this year, that EA breach came from somebody having stealer malware on their system, which grabbed their Slack API access key and sold it on a market. So there's markets for selling people's credentials that they get from the stealer malware. And in fact, I think some of the stealer malware just puts it directly up on the market, like it's all automated. It's just automated market almost. So Raccoon, Vidar, and Redline are examples of this, and some of them are customized to specifically deal with certain things. Like I think Redline is very gaming focused. Will steal people's gaming stuff. I wouldn't be surprised if some of these are specifically focused on stealing crypto. Still looking for wallets, looking for crypto on hard drives and stealing that. But somebody on Twitch is like, "What? Uber got hacked?"
Oh noes.
I'm assuming that's the tongue in cheek. But yeah, so that's where it starts. And this was a point that this was like a hero moment. Potential for hero moment here. The credentials were stolen, but MFA was enabled. So that's where it ends, right? Like it could have ended right there if MFA had been configured in a more resilient manner. And this is another.
I want to double click on that for a second, Adrian,
sure,
because that part of this storyline, certainly intrigued me, right? So they logged in through a company VPN. The VPN kicks back a 2FA prompt to the employee.
Yep.
And what does the attacker do? The attacker spams that prompt for over an hour. Like, if I'm getting spammed 100 VPN login attempts, the first thing I'll end up doing is calling my own IT and security team. Why didn't that happen here? I don't understand how that wasn't detected in even a manual way, because if I had an hour's worth of prompts, I'd be furious.
Yeah, so it's I don't know if it's like multiple prompts a minute, or because a lot of them, like if you do too many, it's going to lock something out, or it's going to stop letting you even try. So you could lock out an account, or just the ability to log in for maybe another hour or something like that. But that's a really good question. I think you and me would, but the average person, maybe they wouldn't. I don't know. But this comes up under a few terms that I keep hearing over and over. MFA fatigue is one, which is the idea that eventually you become fatigued and you're like, yeah, whatever. So with Office 365, this will happen when one of my desktops that's on, but I'm not actively using it, my token will expire. And randomly, when I'm doing something else, I might be at a restaurant or something like that, my Microsoft Authenticator will say, hey, trying to log in again from somewhere. And I always deny it. And then I get back to that machine. And it's like, you couldn't successfully log in, and I have to do it manually again. So there are cases where Microsoft specifically, in my case, that's where it keeps coming up is corporate Office 365 stuff will prompt you to log in when you're not actively doing anything, which I think is a really bad precedent to set. You don't want people getting used to clicking accept, when they're not actually doing anything.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. And I think that stems from the fact that Office 365 is now in the cloud, similar to the way Google works in the cloud, in browsers that have automatic refresh times, right? So you're off at your dinner and the token expires and it auto refreshes the page, which then prompts you for the auth credential, right? And so that's probably why that's happening. You're just smart enough to always say no and then log in when you get back.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, it's like a lot of these attacks are opportunistic. So sure, some employees are going to be savvy, they're going to be paranoid, but all you need is 1 or 2%, right? That's why spam is a thing. That's why you blast it out to everybody, because you only need that, fraction of a percent that's going to click OK or accept or something like that to get in. But this case sounded like it was pretty targeted. Like it was only like 2 accounts they were trying to get in with, and they succeeded.
And then, when we jump to number 6 on your list, we start to see the end result, right? The next steps of the bomb and the fatigue, where you and I would have emailed somebody or called somebody or hit up Slack for our support systems. If you do it fast enough, hit them with 105 minutes and then reach out to them, I can see how that could be confusing, as it says in number 6.
Yeah.
Well, not to mention, if somebody's reaching a frustration point, right, and they're maybe they just hit yes or okay or whatever out of frustration to make something go away if they're in the middle of doing something else. That's entirely possible. Or they put their phone, computer, whatever away, and then somebody calls them and they're still frustrated. So this brings in the whole psychological aspect of attack, not just technological, but frustrating the hell out of the end user until they're just like, all right, whatever, go ahead.
Yeah, and so for those of you that aren't on the page and just listening, step 6 that the attacker did was the attacker reaches out to the employee via WhatsApp and pretends to be from Uber IT, convincing them to approve the 2FA, probably saying something like, hey, we know our systems are acting wonky. If you approve that, we'll jump right in and get it cleaned up for you, something to that effect.
Yeah, and that's the step 6. That's the one that is going to get you every time. So part of my advice here is you just have to plan for it. Like some percentage of your employees will fall for really good social engineering, and you just have to have a plan for that punch in the face when that punch in the face happens. Because it, eventually will, especially if it's a very targeted attack, which this definitely was. Like this attacker specifically wanted to go after Uber. Like Uber was not chosen out of a basket of randomly or anything like that. They wanted Uber. Another note is, like Tyler was mentioning, push storms, which so many terms here. MFA bombing, MFA fatigue, 2 new terms for just annoying the crap out of people with MFA prompts. And then push storms is the term for when somebody does this, because a push auth is a form of authentication. If you've ever used Duo or Microsoft Authenticator, even Google has the concept of push, where you click yes or no, accept or deny, something like that on your phone. and those can be easily detected. So that should be something that raises some eyebrows when that happens.
Yeah, and I think this should have been another opportunity for a person with good, strong security, hygiene, and security skills, right? Whenever anybody reaches out to you, always question the source. Always say, I don't know, I don't trust you. I'm going to call my correct IT or my correct security. I'm going to go inbound to them, because that's one way to completely shoot this thing in the foot. Now, Adrian made a good point. As long as I can remember doing pen tests from 20 years ago, and Adrian too, this always worked. There's always a percentage of people who will not call in and will accept the fact that, hey, maybe IT's already on this. They're being proactive. They're calling me to help me. But whenever you get that outbound message coming towards you saying, hey, we're here to help you, say, sure, great. I'll call. What's your name and number? I will call my direct IT line and ask to be transferred to you, right? And that way you can short circuit that kind of outbound hack style.
Yeah, good training on what IT will ask you to do and not ask you to do. Good training is key there, I think. Mm-hmm. Sorry, go ahead.
And you're still going to lose 20%. 20% of people will still fall for that.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was going to say. And the FBI issues bulletins every year, not specifically for this, but for any kind of scam, any kind of phone-based scam. The IRS is calling you. Don't talk to them. Call them back. Your credit card company is calling to talk to you. Don't talk to them. Call them back.
Nobody wants to talk to those people anyway.
No, absolutely not.
No, you don't really want to. But if somebody's calling and saying, "Oh my God, there's a problem," right. This is how scams happen. They're playing on, the fear, uncertainty, and doubt. This is not germane only to cybersecurity, but busy people aren't going to think about it that much. This isn't, we're taught to look for emails with links and attachments and misspellings and things like that. But when somebody's under pressure and they get a call, it's human nature to panic just even a little bit. And I don't think it's taught as much to say, listen, if somebody from your IT department calls, I've had people from my IT department reach out to me and say, hey, I need you to do this. And I'm like, all right, can't do it now. I'll call you back later or Slack you back later or whatever. Yeah. But that's not part of normal security and awareness training.
So another recommendation here that I've seen a lot of different places, there's many kinds of MFA now. TOTP was one of the early ones, which is where you put in the 6-digit code, first in SMS, and there's other ways to deliver TOTP as well. But also we have security keys now. We have, I don't have mine right next to me right now, but that's really difficult. You physically have to have that security key to log in. It's kind of a pain in the butt because now you have a security key you can lose, you can misplace. It's a higher friction option, but for the kind of access that these attackers got inside Uber, a security key probably should have been required somewhere along that route to get that access. Which we'll get into later, exactly what they managed to get into, which was pretty much everything you can imagine. But number matching is another option as well. It's just a checkbox in your Office 365 admin where, the app will come up, and this can still be social engineered. It can still be fished out of people, but it'll show you 3 numbers, and you have to match the number to the auth prompt that you're seeing. So you get a 14, a 72, and a 50. And you have to type in the correct number to be able to log in. So there are other options with MFA that you need to consider and train employees on and maybe deploy and use. All right, so some employee is going to fail at some point. You're not going to have the right MFA turned on, or it'll be an insider, maybe. Eventually you got to plan for the employee failing, for the attacker getting in to the company on the inside. And this is the point where zero trust peddlers start to salivate. The attacker does get in via the VPN. And I used to train pen testers. Pen testers used to ask me, they're like, okay, I've got creds, I'm in. What next? I tell them, go plunder file servers. And sure enough, that's what this guy did. That's what this guy or gal, we don't know the gender of the attacker, but that's what they did. they and it sounds like they hit the net logon share. So this is a file share everyone has to have access to, because if you log on to the network, there are scripts in there. The reason the share exists is to run scripts to do additional things, to make sure you've got AV installed and that it's updated. Like a lot of security controls in a Windows environment are dependent on the net logon share. We don't know if it was the net logon share. That's kind of a guess. We're doing some guesswork here. But again, it looks like a typical pen test, and this is exactly what would happen on a typical pen test. Many, many times have I gone through that net logon share knowing that there's a chance that there might be passwords in some of those scripts. And in this case, there was.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's a lot of things that we can talk about that with regards to control in that environment. I'm sure you'll get into that, but I want to take a quick step back because you skipped over one piece here about how the attacker actually somehow enrolled their own device for MFA. That's kind of a nifty little thing, right? Because it gives them the ability to, if terminated, relog in themselves. And I'm not sure, and you know this too, you're not sure how they did it, but I'm not exactly sure how they could do that without some kind of MFA alert hitting the original MFA person as a, hey, this is changing type of announcement, so that they know that was being either added. Maybe it was added as a secondary capability. It's tough to know, but that's another important piece. They gave themselves long-term access as well.
So let's go back. Maybe I got this wrong. It could be that it wasn't the VPN sending the 2FA prompt to the employee. Maybe that it was them trying to add MFA to their own device for this user that sent the 2FA prompt to the employee. So it could be step one was get my own phone enrolled so I can truly become this employee, so that I only have to social engineer them once, not every time I use their credentials.
Yeah, that is a valid point. I think either way, it's interesting that they essentially gave themselves a permanent backdoor by adding that secondary 2FA into play. Now, it should also have a email and saying, hey, this was changed and added in your account setup. That should have been another spot where this was caught. If not right away, certainly the next day when the person goes in.
And that's a sign of experience. That's I know a lot of people saying these are 18-year-old hackers, but like adding the MFA to your own device so that you don't have to pester or social engineer that employee a second time. That's experience.
Yeah,
it's somebody who's done this before.
Yep, and then they rolled over and started searching everything, like you said, and found some additional passwords.
Yeah, and that would literally be the first place I would check. The net logon share, because you don't have to search for it. You always know where it's going to be, because it's going to be accessed as you log into the VPN. The Active Directory is going to use it. So possibly the very first place they checked, they found creds that gave them access to just about everything. And so these creds, these were for, it looks like Uber was using the product Thycotic, which could be any of these products, which is a privilege access management tool, but also has basically like a secrets manager, a password manager, an enterprise password manager. And so a couple things here. I worked for a company called Thinkst, and no longer working for them or getting paid by them. But this is a good opportunity to use some fake credentials, to use some canary credentials. Take your net logon share, put some fake credentials in there. The moment somebody uses them, you get an alert. That's not a normal employee. Or if that is a normal employee, that normal employee is up to no good. So put some fake credentials in there, put some fake AWS access keys. You can even use these canary tokens for free. You can go to canarytokens.org, create some. You could create a dozen before we're even done with this segment. You don't even have to create an account. Very useful for detecting this kind of kind of smash and grab, searching through files and things. And they've got file tokens and credential tokens, and you can mix them all together. You can use them together. So you can have a Word doc when somebody opens it, sends an alert. A lot of ways to catch snooping in places where nobody should be snooping. All right, so these Thycotic credentials got them into this secrets manager, and within this secrets manager, they had Windows Domain Admin, they had Slack, they had vSphere, they had Duo, they had OneLogin, they had AWS, G Suite, HackerOne. I've almost run out of fingers for
oh my
those
gosh,
watching.
They literally had everything.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, once you get into Duo, OneLogin, Domain Admin, you own everybody else's accounts. You own you're rendering MFA useless. You're potentially, most things in a large corporation like this are going to be tied into that, some kind of Azure AD or OneLogin in this case. So antivirus, EDR, MDR stuff. Yep. Endpoint security is probably going to be compromised at this point. And this sounds very much like it's the corporate IT side of Uber, because I've heard from many different people over the years that Uber, one thing they do a decent job of is separating the driver-rider application side of IT from corporate IT. So I think that, when Uber says, we don't see any evidence that they get access to any driver or rider data, that sounds like it could be, a legit statement, because that's something I've consistently heard over the years, is that there's good separation between those environments.
So I also want to take a step back. We talked about adding their own device for 2FA to the VPN. It's not very clear in what you wrote up here. But they could have actually added their own device to the full credentials, maybe at the controller level, which then gives them, because the reason why I bring this up is logging into Thycotic should have had 2FA enabled and required that. I mean, that's a massive spot of attack, right? That'd be the first place you could go. So
that's what I'm saying. You got to have the security key. They should have had a physical security key. Like if you're going to have it anyway. Exactly. It's before you get into the secrets database, right?
Yeah. That's definitely one of those spots where you should have had to put your hand on a sensor, get your eyeball scanned, the whole 9 yards, right? To get to that level of control.
It should be inconvenient to access to gain that level of power and access. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can justify inconvenience and friction there. This isn't somebody logging into a POS system to ring up a customer, which they're going to do 400 times that day. This is totally different.
Yep.
So again, another place you can put some fake credentials to catch people that shouldn't be in there, put that in your password database as well. Put some fake credentials in there. Yeah. Something that would let you know that somebody's in there that shouldn't be.
Yeah, you could just label the account, all our money is here, and see who goes there.
You'd be surprised how bold you can be. Like passwords.docx. There are real companies that store their passwords in a file called passwords.docx. You can be that bold, and attackers will go for it because they know real companies actually do that. Yeah. So at that point, it's kind of game over. Like, I'm not even sure. Like, once you have access to the secrets manager, like, there's so many backdoors that this attacker could put in for themselves. I don't know how you effectively eject them without just burning a lot of stuff down and starting over.
Yeah, I would love to see an IR report for how this was handled internally. We'll never see it, but it would be really neat to see an IR report and how they were able to contain this or not contain this, and what the timeline of containment actually ended up having to be. Yeah,
I wouldn't say never. There have been a couple cases like this where either a class action lawsuit or a Senate or House subcommittee investigation has resulted in that IR report becoming public. So don't give up hope. It could be, but it's going to be a couple years at least, though. I think Equifax's the House subcommittee or Senate subcommittee report came out in 2017. It was like 18 months after, something like that.
Yeah, and then the last thing I'll bring up on this particular one is you could tell this was a younger person who's out there attacking more for, with incentives that are probably structured more for the challenge or the lulls or the fame, not necessarily the money, because they then logged into Slack, HackerOne, and other services and mocked and taunted Uber directly. That's just bold and crazy. If you had this level of access, why would you ever give yourself away? It just goes to show you that, the incentives are just so different for different styles and types of hacker classes as well.
Well, and so the rumor is Lapsus is the group that this attacker is connected to, and this attacker or this group is also connected to a ton of other hacks that have happened this year, including the Rockstar games. Like that was a big thing, that GTA 6 videos had been downloaded and leaked, which also fits the younger person profile here. Yeah. Because they're not after money or anything. They're just having fun, I guess.
They're there for the lulls, the rebellion, the challenge, the lulls, testing something new.
Yeah. Return of lulsec.
There you go.
So some other details. The initial target was apparently a contractor, so there's a lot of discussion around contractors being kind of treated as second-class employees, even though they have like full employee access to things in a lot of cases. You've got to give them security as strong as anybody else. You don't secure by the type of employee, you secure by the level of access, right? So I think that's one of the big lessons coming out of here is, the level of security control should be on what an attacker potentially gets access to.
Yeah, I like this comment on Twitch. Nonsense commented. Basically, he was insinuating that now that this kid is in there, or whoever this attacker is in there, all the nation state attackers that are already inside are kind of like, oh man, now we're in trouble.
Yeah, and that if that case, if that's a real thing, if nation states are in there. It's not the first time that's happened, that no. Somebody else's carefully curated access has been messed up by a different attacker. And in fact, we interviewed somebody a while back. I forget his name, the gentleman who was in Estonia, I think, was talking about doing incident response and finding like a secondary attack during his incident. Like, this is... This is another
if you're
company
a big enough target,
hacked.
That's probably not all that uncommon.
These days, probably not.
I would be shocked if there's not somebody living inside, Uber, Facebook already, right? Like it's just so big. If this can happen so fast from an 18-year-old, that this has got to be happening all over the place, and I wouldn't be surprised if there's already people living inside all of these targets.
Yeah. Yeah. Also, something I did not put into the show notes that I should have is Daniel Meisler's Consumer Authentication Strength Maturity Model, or CASM is the acronym there. I should drop this into the Discord at the very least. But it's a nice visual way of talking about different types of MFA and how, or authentication. Actually, it starts with just passwords. The first four just talk about passwords, and then the last four talk about MFA. And nice visual, gives examples, good recommendations on how to strengthen authentication from least secure to most secure. So really handy model there, maturity model for authentication. Let's see, what else here? Another thought that kind of hit me is looking at everything the attacker did and then thinking about what I know about like ISO 27000, PCI, stuff like that. I think Uber could have been 100% compliant with all that stuff and still, the attacker got in. With everything that they did, which is just not going to be surprising to anybody. I think it's old news that compliance isn't security, but just another example to point to say, yeah, we're compliant, but we still need to push. We still need to push for, a little bit better than where we're
when
at.
the weakness is the human layer, right? When the weakness is the human layer, there's no compliance that's ever going to get that fixed if that's where the actual attack essentially occurred, which in this case it really did. That was the crux of the attack, was the bypass of the 2FA, and the social engineering aspect of it. There's no compliance that'll fix that. There's always going to be a percentage of people that fall for that, and trying to figure out how to put in controls that layer on top of and mitigate the risk of that style attack. That's about the best you can do.
Yeah, actually, Nonsense brought up another good point. He said, haha, what requirement is, in PCI is don't leave plain text creds. I think there's literally a don't leave plain text creds PCI requirement, and it's somewhere in requirement 3 if memory serves.
Yes.
And
requirement 3.2 section, don't be stupid.
Yeah. I think you're pretty close. I think it is part of 3.2.
Oh, there you go. And I've never read my PCI cred, so I have no idea.
I used to have a lot of it memorized just from being a PCI QSA, but yeah, no, I do remember that, plain text creds are literally mentioned in PCI. But, yeah, and then the other thing, so if our standards and our compliance isn't enough, the thing that's great about standards and compliance is they're all organized, listed out. Here are the things that you need to do. And then from there, if that's not enough, we're left with best practices or common practices or whatever you want to call them. And where do I get those from? Right? Like I have to attend a bunch of conferences. I have to read a bunch of tweets. I have to, there's so many places to get best practices from, and they're constantly changing. Every now and then you get lucky with something like Daniel Meisler's authentication maturity model, but that kind of stuff, like you just have to know what you're doing, and a lot of people can look at the way they had MFA configured and say, oh yeah, that was dumb, but that's not, I haven't seen any standards for, here's specifically how you should configure MFA. I've seen a few things that finally got into standards that say don't use SMS-based MFA anymore, but that stuff just moves too slow to keep attackers out. So, that's where security gets tough, is it's constantly changing, and where you understand what is safe and what isn't is just nobody can really tell you that. It's just kind of a mix of, experience and lots of sources of information, like this podcast, like this wonderful podcast where we're telling you all this stuff.
Well, so let me ask you a question on that specifically, though. Is the 2FA as configured in this story configured in a risky way? Meaning it still truly took a human mistake for the 2FA to be attacked. In this case, the inability of this particular person to detect the scam of somebody, calling or WhatsApping them going, hey, this is your IT department. That's really where the attack was. The 2FA stuff was just abused to desensitize the person and cause them to be more lax about their security at a human level. So I don't even know if I would go so far as to say that the 2FA was not properly set up.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of people saying, yeah, no, this, is a best practice to at least have number matching on. And I think certainly, like we were talking about earlier, if you're going to have credentials that give you access to a secrets database with domain admin, Google Workspace, like everything in it, that should have been that should have been 5-factor authentication there. Well, and another thing is, who needs access to that many things all at once? Like that should have been more compartmentalized. I can't think of a single admin that needs access to both HackerOne and be a domain admin. Like, it's kind of crazy to me that they got access to such a breadth of systems from just a single credential. Like, and maybe there's more to it than that. Maybe they pivoted, they got some more credentials, and it wasn't just from a single credential. But certainly, it sounds like the secret should have been more compartmentalized. But I mean, and that's what we're talking about is, there are a lot of good lessons to learn here. Hopefully people go back and review their MFA and the level of authentication, based on what it gives access to in your environment. And there's a lot of opportunities here where they could have spotted this attacker and shut them down and kicked them out, if they detected them soon enough.
And I think one thing that you and I talked about the other day that we haven't addressed here is holding vendors to a higher standard, because there were a couple of places here where there were configurations that weren't managed properly. There were settings that could have been tighter. When do we hold the vendors more accountable? I think we talked about it a couple weeks ago, and Tyler made the comment of, it's just not happening in the industry. Well, it's up to security people to lead that charge, right? Holding their vendors, whether they're part of the vendor or they're consumers, they're in the IT, ops, security, whatever department that works with these security tools, to hold them to a higher standard where maybe instead of, it's like the difference between the privacy regs in the US versus EMEA. It's not opt into these settings. It's not opt into these secure configurations. It's having to opt out of them. So when do we hit that point where we're holding vendors more accountable for that? And is our failure to do that perpetuating A, the difficulty of securing environments, and B, just creating a situation where nobody really has to be held accountable for this because they're saying, hey, we're going to give you the option to opt in. Like, you don't have an option to buy a car anymore without an airbag. Like, it just it
right.
doesn't happen, right? You don't have the option anymore. There are a lot of things. You can't buy a car without seatbelts. You don't have to use them necessarily, so that's not the best example, but anti-lock brakes, things like that. They're put in for safety measures. The manufacturers are held more accountable, and therefore, yes, it takes a while. Things drag. There's legacy tooling, et cetera, et cetera. But when are we going to hold the vendors more accountable for building tooling to the highest standard? I know, Tyler, you're going to say, well, this is human error. Human error can always defeat it. Well, maybe if there are better tools available to cross-check these things, making sure that there aren't used passwords, making sure that there is, I'm sure somebody way smarter than me can build some kind of identity and access system that checks across domains to say, no, you've used this password, right? Like, these things exist. This isn't some sort of fantasy here. Why aren't we using them? Why aren't we implementing them? Why aren't we saying, if I'm going to pay you $10,000, $100,000, $1 million, $10 million a year, security vendor X, I want all my security settings at the highest level by default. And then I get to choose. And then it's my fault as the end user if I get breached.
I think it's actually the reverse. Like, the more you pay for a product, I think the less anti-foot gun measures you get in that product. The more they really give you the power to screw yourself over hard if you misconfigure things. And I don't think it should necessarily be that way. Like, if you really want to unwrap things, sure, put some friction in there, make it hard for somebody to enable dumb settings. But yeah, for whatever reason, the more you pay for a product, it seems the easier it is to screw it up.
And why is that? Why, as an industry, are we letting that happen? Both on the builder side and on the user side.
Customers have to push for better. Customers have to push for more there. And I think that's it. I think I study a lot of breaches, and a lot of what I see are foot gun type stuff, where somebody doesn't know how to use the product properly. Like, a lot of these products get purchased, but the time is not put in to configure them correctly, to validate that configuration by running simulated attacks against them. It's a lot of work to make sure that you've set up certain things correctly, and resilient to attack.
Guess what else is a lot of work?
Yeah.
Being somebody like Joe Sullivan or Mudge right now, right? That's a lot of work.
Yeah. I don't think it occurs to some teams that that is a step that needs to be there. Okay, you've bought the product, you've implemented it, and it's working, but your work isn't really done until you simulate some attacks against it, until you think about, the attack surface on it, the threat model for it. I can't imagine implementing an enterprise level password safe or secrets store without really thinking hard about, God, this is the last place I want anybody to break into. Like, I want to make it, I can't imagine not thinking I want to make it really hard for somebody to get access to all this stuff. But,
and this isn't to knock security practitioners, because we know that they're overworked, they're asked to do too much, they're asked to use too many tools, et cetera, et cetera. But this is a failure of the industry as a whole, and we keep letting it happen. This isn't, something that happens here and there. It happens all the time. And this is basic security.
What's the likelihood of them building it if customers aren't asking for it or demanding it? Cars, we had to go through a pretty ugly period with automobiles to get safety in cars, right? And that took regulation. That took federal regulation. That didn't just happen because customers asked for seatbelts and stuff like that. And even then,
in fact,
it was a struggle to get them to use them.
At the time, were against seatbelts.
Yeah.
Most consumers at the time said, we don't want anybody to tell us what we have to do. And you know what? I understand that. I don't want the government telling me what to do either, but sometimes it is best for us to actually think about our own security and our own safety.
Yeah. Yeah. So again, we're kind of caught in that trap because technology and security moves too fast for regulation to keep up. But we come to this conclusion that, well, it's going to have to be regulation to, make sure secure defaults are in place. So it's kind of a catch-22. And I don't know how that gets solved.
Is it a regulatory issue? Is it an ethical issue? If you're building products, do you have, some sort of an ethical or a moral obligation at some level?
Sure.
If you're the kind of person who starts a company because you were an end user and you didn't have a product to do the thing you wanted to be able to do security-wise, which is a very, I don't know the exact percentage, but a very high percentage of security companies get started by former end users who say, I was frustrated by the inability to do X.
Mm-hmm. And
so at least at the onset, they're saying, hey, this wasn't good enough. So where does their responsibility as an entrepreneur, as a builder of products, as a founder of a company, as the head of a company that's selling a product or products, where does that moral and ethical responsibility come in to say, hey, if I'm going to do this to fix the problem, I should really fix the problem instead of giving people easy out to not fix the problem?
There have to be incentives to want to fix the problem, though. If the That's security control means more friction, means you inevitably make less money by introducing more friction, slowing down the business, that's just not where incentives are.
Right.
So either the control has to be able to do it without friction, or on the end user, you're not going to introduce that much friction. But on the internal side, like you said, with certain access, certain systems, make it tough. Make it really tough. You have to do like 18 burpees to get into the system. And guess what? Only the people who are going to do those 18 burpees are going to get into the system. And you know what? If you're an attacker who goes to like huge extents to break in, good for you, man. Like, you earned it. But this wasn't an I earned it attack. But there's this human thing that happens, when sure, everything's clear right now in hindsight, now that the breach has happened, but there's this human thing that happens that says, this is such a pain in the ass. I have to authenticate with this thing 20 times a day. Like, let's just pop this down to the next lower level, because it just, it grates on you day in and day out. And ultimately, I guess you could say that's bad design. Like there should be better design to fix that. But often it takes a couple of years for that innovation to happen. And phones are pretty convenient right now, like fingerprint readers and Face ID and stuff like that. I don't think gets leveraged quite enough. But yeah, we're going to have these periods where it's just too inconvenient for somebody doing their day every day. And eventually you forget that you're, guarding a hoard of gold or something like that. Like you just want your day-to-day job to be a little bit easier. You care less and less each day as you go through your daily grind that you've got these tons of secrets in the database. It's just easy to get desensitized, I guess. So I think it's a good place to wrap up the conversation here. Would love to hear, got some great comments in this segment. Maybe should we do more of these segments? I think this was kind of cool to do. It was fun to kind of walk through that. It's a personal research project of mine to analyze breaches. So I like doing this kind of thing, but I feel like we need to learn from these events. We shouldn't necessarily be shaming Uber about this. They're having a very bad day. But I think these details need to be public more often so that we can learn from these mistakes. I think as an industry, we would move a lot quicker if we knew exactly what mistakes people were making that get them popped, get them in trouble.
And I think that's a really good point. Like, yes, we're talking about Uber right now, but tomorrow, literally tomorrow, it could be any other brand name company. So this is not necessarily we're calling out Uber because they're Uber or what for whatever reason. It's we've seen this movie before and we're going to see it again and again and again and again and insert new brand name tomorrow and next week and next month and next year.
But it's these little details we need, like I want more details. Like Tyler was asking, how did they add MFA to their device? I'm not sure how that process works. And what product was that? Was that Duo? The product that they were using. Like I want to know those little details because they're important. For you to be able to protect against this kind of thing. It would be useful to know what product it was. All those little details. Like when the stuff came out about Equifax, like we got details about their culture, how they held meetings, how they talked about security. And those are important details coming out of a breach also, because sometimes it's not that they misconfigured a product. It's because their culture didn't give a crap. And that's what led to all the products being misconfigured. Like the root cause oftentimes is political or social. It's not necessarily just a technical thing.
Yeah.
All right. We're going to wrap there, and we'll be back in a few moments with the weekly enterprise news.